Hello everybody and welcome to this video. I am thrilled to be back doing videos. I wanted to say up front, thank you very much for your patience. While I've taken a bit of a break from these things, it wasn't from lack of interest and it certainly wasn't from a lack of game releases. You may have seen that I have been keeping the digitally downloaded website going nice and strong, but it has been one of those times a year where everything just conspired to hit me at once and I just had to focus on what I was going to spend my time doing. I had 2 magazines to get out in 2 weeks, which is a huge effort for any publisher, let alone an independent working by themselves largely. And I also had a whole bunch of stuff going on in the back end, which you will find out about in the coming weeks and whatever. It's just been one of those times of year where I just had no time to breathe. But the good news is I do see a bit of runway in front of me now. I think I've got a bit more time, and hopefully it's going to be a while before I have to take a break from doing these videos again, because I do enjoy doing them a great deal. And I'm very happy to say that I'm back talking about one of my favorite subjects, first video back, and that is the RPG or the JRPG, and in particular, Valkyrie Elysium. Now, this is a game that Square Enix has kind of dropped on us in amongst a lot of other things that they're doing at the moment. They also released the Direfield Chronicle just a couple of weeks ago. There was a Voice of Cards game in there that I think people very quickly forgot about, even though that is an excellent series. We've got Star Ocean just on the horizon. So dropping this right there in the middle of all of those things seemed like an unwise thing for them to do to me. But they have done it, and it is not making a huge splash, unfortunately, perhaps unsurprisingly, but unfortunately. The Metacritic rating at the moment is around 66. That is a much lower rating than what I'll be giving it in my review, which you'll be able to check out on the DD website probably today. But I don't want to review it in this video. Rather, I'd like to talk about why I think this game hasn't quite resonated as well as some of Square Enix's other titles. And it has to do with the style of it, because to me, Valkyrie Elysium is very operatic in tone. And perhaps because there isn't a great crossover between game critics that are also fans of opera, or gamers in general that are also fans of opera, I think the appeal of this game was lost a little bit on some people. And that's not to criticize them. You see what you see, you play what you play, and you kind of think what you think about a game. But I do think that if you have an understanding of opera, then you would enjoy this one a lot more than if you don't really know much about that form. And again, I don't think there are that many game critics or gamers in general that are also seen at the opera on a regular basis. So I think that's where some of that disconnect comes from. I'm a huge fan of opera myself, so I really enjoyed this game. And there is a kind of trend that whenever a developer creates an operatic game, it tends to not do so well with the critics. And there are 2 examples in particular that really stand out to me. One is a PlayStation 2 title called Chaos Legion. This is a game that I've been desperate to play again since the PlayStation 2. Capcom, who was the original publisher of it, has never republished it. They've never done a HD remaster of it. And to date, it's actually one of the ones that is very hard to emulate. So I haven't been able to replay it as I would like to. But I really love that game back on the PlayStation 2. Despite it having a very negative rating from the, not negative, but kind of a middling rating with the critics. And I think the reason for that was, again, it was very operatic in theme. Another good example would be the original NieR. Now, these days, it's hard to imagine a time where NieR was not a beloved property, but the original NieR was pretty much panned by critics. I think the original one had a Metacritic that's at around 56 or so percent. It was only when NieR Automata got released that critics went back and looked at the original one and realized that it was actually quite good. And that was more from the hindsight of having also played NieR Automata and had a better understanding of Yoko Taro's vision. If you were a fan of opera, then you probably would have seen that original vision in the original game anyway. And there was a cult following for the original NieR that came from that, I think. I think the crossover of people who were fans of Chaos Legion and NieR, the original NieR, were like me, people who had a greater understanding of opera. So what I want to use the rest of this video for is kind of talk about why these games come across as quite operatic in tone, because when people think about opera, they immediately think to quite large people singing. I mean, that's kind of the visual image that people have about opera. And certainly that's a big part of real life staged opera, that you have these people that are larger than life. I mean, metaphorically, if not physically. And if you've ever been to an opera and you're sitting in the crowd, the sound that hits you from their voices is just so powerful and so full of emotion that it washes over you. It just hits you like this massive wall of sound. And even if you don't understand the lyrics, and a lot of operas are sung in foreign languages to us in English, then you still get a sense of what's going on because of the sheer power of that voice. So that is what people understand about opera. But really, opera has always been an art form that is respected as an art form because it combines just about every form of art you can think of. It is a combination of art, of words, of drama, of dance, of music. A lot of operas had ballets in there. The symphonies of opera groups create, or the composers of opera music end up being quite famous, not just for their operas, but also not just for their music in the context of the opera, sorry, but the music itself is also quite well known, whether you know the opera or not. So it's kind of a combination of all these things. And it is, in many ways, the epitome of what live performance should be. That is why it is such a respected and kind of venerable art form these days. When you look at video games, you don't have the singing, obviously, but you do have the same kind of core components of what makes opera so special in video games. You've got the combination of the visuals, you've got the combination of, you've got the character, you've got the music, which is often well respected, independent of the game itself. You've got all of these things plus the interactivity of video games. So a lot of people like to think of video games as kind of the ultimate art form because they are everything that we loved about the arts plus interactivity. So in many ways, they kind of, video games aspire to be the same kind of complete art experience as opera. But opera is also an aesthetic, and there are different subgenres of opera. And in the context of the games that I'm talking about in this video, when I compare them to opera, it's really comparing them to the aesthetics of one particular subgenre of opera, which is opera seria. Opera seria is the serious form of opera. It is the one with the tragic stories, and it generally features kings and princes and princesses and knights and mythology and goblins and all of those kinds of things. So in many ways, it's kind of comparable to the Greek tragic theatre of ancient Greece, or the epic poem, to use the kind of poetry take on the epic, the epic poem. So really, the games that I'm talking about here are most comparable to that subgenre of opera. And you see that quite explicitly with Valkyrie Elysium. Valkyrie Elysium tells a story about gods and mythology and all of that stuff. And it also has a very strong tragic tone throughout it, where it is a melancholic take on the end of the world. And you see that in NieR as well, which is also a melancholic take on a kind of apocalypse. And also Chaos Legion has that same sense of melancholy and tragedy and kind of heightened story of gods and beasts. So that is kind of the tradition that these games belong in. So to take it all the way back to the original point I was making, that the critics and the gamers that don't get along with Valkyrie Elysium may be because they don't necessarily understand the artistic context of these games. That is really where it's coming from. When people say that Valkyrie Elysium doesn't have a great story, I would disagree with that. It's got quite a strong story. It doesn't tell the story through words, but then opera doesn't really tell its stories through words either. It's more about the impact, it's more about the atmosphere, it's more about the story that it's telling underneath what you see and what you're experiencing. It's an experiential story that Valkyrie Elysium is telling. And it's the same with the graphics. You know, when people complain about the graphics being washed out, which is something that I've seen quite often, or basic, it is because they want to convey that feeling of melancholia, and that is very important to this kind of genre, that it does feel kind of deadened and sad and colorless, which is all intentional. And you may not like it, you may not particularly like this aesthetic, but it is deliberate and it is quite impactful. And if you're get it, if this is your kind of aesthetic, then you realize that Valkyrie Elysium is actually a really good looking game. It feels nice. It has nice atmosphere. It conveys it very powerfully through its visuals, through its action, through its movement. And that movement itself is quite beautiful to experience. As I said earlier in the video, a lot of operas do feature ballet as part of the experience. Ballet is very closely related to opera, and a lot of times it's kind of combined. There will be a ballet in the middle of a lot of operas, and the movement in Valkyrie Elysium feels very balletic. It's graceful, it's flowing, it's smooth, it's dance-like. It has a sense of choreography about it. And again, I doubt that game developers came into the studio to say, we're going to make an operatic game, but I think there's something quite inherent about that in there. It's too clear for it not to be a deliberate design choice, and I think that they were trying to make something kind of beautiful in this way, and it just happened to be inspired by opera. Anyway, that's what I think. I really like this game. I really, really do. I'm going to be the outlier in that, and there aren't too many other people that are going to give it high review scores, and certainly it's going to drop off the agenda and fall away for a long time, much like Chaos Legion did, much like NieR did for a long time until NieR Automata saved it. It's just going to be one of those games, unfortunately, but I love it. Let me know your own thoughts if you played it. Do let me know what you thought about the game in the comments. If you enjoyed it, let me know if you got the opera theme through it, if you're a fan of opera, and perhaps this video has made you want to try it out. Let me know that as well. Let's have a good chat about it. But I'm glad to be back again. Once again, hopefully it's going to be a while before I disappear. If you do want to support everything that we do at digitallydownloaded.net, please do consider backing me on Patreon. The more resources I have, the more I'm able to throw at all this stuff and continue to grow it. And, it'd be great to have more people doing videos and stuff, but I need money to do that. So I need your support. You can find the link to my Patreon in the comments below. And you're also supporting the website when you support the videos that we're doing. And in return, you also get the magazine for free each month. So that's a pretty good deal, a 56-page magazine on all things to do with Japanese art. So that's a thank you for supporting us if you do on Patreon for just $1 a month. Other than that, if you do want to make sure that you don't miss my videos as I do them, do hit the like and subscribe button. And otherwise, have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy playing the games. Pick this one up if you haven't yet, and we will see you next week.